Everyone knows phones are ruining our lives, right? Yet when you actually look at the science, it's not easy to see this. Let me explain. First of all, what exactly do we hate about our phones? The camera, messages, or doom scrolling on TikTok? These sorts of mixed feelings were captured really well by a great study in 2024. Researchers surveyed over 1,000 college students. They asked them about TikTok, Instagram, and maps. The question, would you prefer to live in a world without this app? Here's what they found. The majority of respondents said they prefer to live in a world without TikTok and Instagram, but almost nobody said they wanted to live in a world without maps. So clearly people don't hate everything about their phones, but one thing we seem to all agree on is that they're a huge distraction. This has led many people to call for banning phones in school. That's one of the major recommendations of Jonathan Haidt, a vocal critic of giving kids access to phones and social media. I'll have more to say about him later. This recommendation isn't actually that controversial. At least 35 US states already have some restrictions on phone use in school, and a 2025 survey found that even 41% of teens supported these bans. If phones are really as harmful as people think they are, then banning them should have a lot of great effects. Students might be more focused, they might learn better. But the truth is that nobody really knew what would happen when they banned these phones from schools. Until now. A recent study of tens of thousands of schools found some surprising results. Researchers compared high schools and middle schools that banned phones to those that didn't. The schools that banned phones required kids to put their phones in these pouches for the duration of school. So, question 1. Did banning phones make students feel more focused? No, even 3 years after the ban started. And test scores didn't improve either. Okay, but what about disruptions in class? There was a spike in things like suspensions in the first year. After that, behavior and attendance returned to pretty much normal levels. And there was no change in students' perceptions of online bullying either. So did anything change? Yes. Students' self-reported well-being went up after the first year and stayed up. And the improvement was pretty big. For comparison, the improvement was almost twice as big as paying people to deactivate their Facebook accounts for 4 weeks, which researchers found in a 2020 study. What would Jonathan Haidt say about these results? Well, we don't really have to speculate because he made a post about it on X on May 7th. First, he correctly pointed out that these study results are not yet peer-reviewed, so after other researchers get a chance to review the work, they may refine their analysis. He also pointed out that students in phone-free schools may have just spent more time on Chromebooks or tablets, so maybe one distraction just got replaced with another. He could be right, we just don't know. And he did highlight the result that student well-being went up. This last point is important because Haidt hasn't just argued that phones are distracting, but that they've contributed to a mental health crisis in children. And this makes some intuitive sense, because social media can be addictive and it encourages a lot of social comparison. But the evidence isn't really that strong. Most of it is correlational, meaning that the rise of smartphones and social media has coincided with increases in depression and anxiety rates. But this could just be a coincidence. And there could be many causes for those increases in depression and anxiety. Also, these trends are mostly localized to the US, not the rest of the world, despite the fact that people everywhere else also have access to Instagram. Now, this doesn't mean Haidt is wrong. And in fact, I think he's right to focus primarily on children because they're a vulnerable group. But what about adults? A lot of us feel like spending too much time on our phone makes us more unhappy, but what does the evidence show? Unfortunately, even though there's lots of research on this question, lots of past studies have just asked people to report on their phone use and what they do on their phones. And this has some obvious problems because people might misremember or misreport what they do on their phones. That's what makes this study from 2025 so interesting. They collected data from about 10,000 US adults for 4 weeks and recorded their screen time in the apps they were using. They also asked people to regularly log their mood. And this was important because it allowed them to test whether their phone use during 1 week predicted changes in their moods the following week. Here's what they found. First of all, people spent way more time on non-social apps than social apps. The difference was an average of about 4 hours per day. But did their phone use affect their mood? Not really. They found that time spent on social apps did not affect people's moods the following week. But they did find that time spent on non-social apps did affect people's moods the following week. It was a tiny effect, though. So if you wanted to increase your mood by 1 point on a 5-point scale on average, you would have to spend an additional 70 minutes per hour on non-social apps. Now, in case it's not obvious, there's only 60 minutes an hour, so that's impossible. You can't spend an additional 70 minutes per hour on these apps. That's how small the effect was. The study has its limitations, but ultimately they found that other factors like age and gender had a bigger impact on people's moods than time spent on phone or the apps they were using. So, are phones bad for us? I actually think the research is kind of inconclusive on this point right now. This might be a case where our intuitions are right. phones are actually bad for us, and the research can't answer this question because it's a hard question to answer well. But it may be a case where our intuitions are wrong, and the research is showing us that phones are not actually as distracting, or they don't impact our well-being as well as we think they do. What do you think?